So Drake just dropped 3 albums in one night. Iceman, Habibti, Maid of Honor, no real rollout, no press run, no radio promo push, just boom, 3 albums, Friday night, go stream them. And the internet immediately split into 2 camps. One said, okay, Drake is back, he's making a statement after getting cooked in the Kendrick beef. The other side, the people who actually pay attention to how the music industry works, said something way more interesting. They said he's buying his freedom. And look, O'Shea Jackson Jr., Ice Cube's son, literally got on X the same night and asked, did he drop 3 albums to get out of the deal? And that's the right question, because this isn't new. Artists have been using their own music as a weapon against their labels for decades. So today I want to talk about the full history of the Contract Escape album. What it is, how it works, who's done it, and whether Drake just pulled off the most expensive jailbreak in music history. Let's get into it. So before we get into the war stories, you need to understand the battlefield. When a major label signs an artist, the contract doesn't just say, make us some music. It specifies a minimum album commitment, usually somewhere between 3 and 7 studio albums. You don't get off the label's roster until you deliver every single one of those albums. That's the lock. And the label holds all the leverage. They control your release schedule. They control whether your album comes out or sits in a vault. They decide what gets promoted and what gets buried. You can, record the greatest album ever made, and if the label doesn't feel like it's worthy of being released, guess what? It doesn't come out. You still owe them records, and the clock doesn't stop. The advance money the label gave you up front, that's not a gift. That's a debt. It gets recouped from your royalties. And in most deals, especially the predatory ones that were standard for decades, the royalty rate is low enough that artists rarely see royalty checks at all. They live on touring money while the label makes money from their catalog. So the artists who figured out how to game the system, they deserve respect because most of them were fighting alone against a billion-dollar machine with a lawyer and a pen. So we have to start here, 1975. Lou Reed is coming off the massive commercial success of The Transformer and Walk on the Wild Side. RCA Records has built a whole marketing identity around him, and they expect a follow-up that fits that mold. But instead, Lou Reed hands them Metal Machine music, a double album, an hour and 6 minutes of nothing but layered guitar feedback, distortion, and electronic noise. No vocals, no melody, no drums, no songs, just sustained modulated chaos and craziness. So RCA panicked. They had no idea what to do with it. They pulled it from the shelves after just 3 weeks. And then the record stores were accepting returns. Now, Lou Reed also maintained this was a serious artistic statement. And honestly, 50 years later, experimental music academics have kind of come around to agreeing with him. But at the time, people were furious. Critics called it the worst album ever made. Fans felt betrayed. Here's what matters, though. Whether it was art, sabotage, or both, it worked. The relationship between Lou Reed and RCA was never the same after that. He had poisoned the well. He handed them something completely unusable and made it their problem. Now, this one is almost too wild to believe. Neil Young leaves Reprise Records in the early 1980s and signs with Geffen. David Geffen personally recruits him. That's a big deal. Excitement all around. And then Neil Young just refuses to be Neil Young. His first album for Geffen, Trance, a synth-driven vocoder album about, and I'm not making this up, his nonverbal son and how he tried to communicate with him using technology. Now that's emotionally real, artistically bold, but commercially disastrous. Geffen hated it. So they told Neil to go back to his classic rock roots, make that album. Neil said, sure, and then delivered Everybody's Rockin', a 25-minute throwback rockabilly record recorded with a fake band he invented called The Shocking Pinks. Shortest album of his career, completely uncommercial, totally unrepresentative of anything his audience wanted. Geffen Records actually sued him, filed a lawsuit claiming Neil Young had deliberately delivered unrepresentative and uncommercial records. They're essentially suing an artist for not making music his label could sell. Neil Young then countersued for $21 million and full creative control. It gets settled. Geffen personally apologizes. Neil Young finishes out his contract, making whatever he wants, a country album, a synth rock album, whatever, and eventually goes back to Reprise. But think about what happened. A label tried to take an artist to court for being too weird, and the artist said, come on then. Now that's levels. If you want to talk about fighting for artistic freedom, though, every conversation eventually leads back to Prince. In 1992, Prince signed what was reportedly a $100 million deal with Warner Brothers Records. Huge money, historic at the time, and almost immediately it turned into a nightmare. Warner wanted control over his release schedule. Prince was releasing music faster than they could sell it. The man was writing hundreds of songs a year. The label wanted to slow him down, regulate the output, protect the commercial value of each release. Prince saw that as creative imprisonment, so he started fighting back publicly. Visibly, he changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol. He showed up to events with the word slave written on his cheek. He called Warner Brothers modern-day slave masters. He talked openly about how labels trapped artists in deals that stripped them of their masters, their identity, and their output. But he also had to actually deliver albums to get free. So in 1996, Prince dropped Chaos and Disorder, an album he described in the liner notes as originally recorded for private use only. He called it blatant contract filler. He refused to tour behind it, refused to promote it, just handed it to Warner Brothers and said, here's your album. He wasn't trying to make a hit. He wasn't checking a box, paying a toll. That album was the key to the door, not the destination. And once he was free, he released Emancipation, a triple album, completely independent, the same year. The contrast couldn't have been more deliberate. Here's what I am turning in when I'm working for you. Here's what I make when I'm free. That's a statement, and that was Prince. Okay, so Prince fought the label with noise and protest. Frank Ocean played chess. Frank Ocean signed to Def Jam, which is Universal Music Group, early in his career. And after that massive success of Channel Orange in 2012, everyone was waiting on album 2. For 4 years, nothing came. Frank went ghost. The label was sitting on a deal with one of the hottest artists in the music, and he just vanished. What we now know is that Frank Ocean was cooking something, and he knew exactly how he wanted to deploy it. In August of 2016, he drops a visual album called Endless on Apple Music, shot in a warehouse. Him, over 45 minutes, building a staircase out of wood. Abstract, experimental, streaming only, released under Def Jam. The next day, literally 24 hours later, he drops Blonde, one of the greatest albums of the decade, released under his own independent label, Boys Don't Cry. What happened? Endless was the contract album, the last record he legally owed Def Jam. He negotiated to fulfill his obligation with that one release, which let him put out Blonde completely independently, meaning he owned his masters, kept his streaming money, controlled his release, controlled everything. Frank Ocean later said that Endless was the final move in a 7-year chess game with Def Jam. 7 years. He'd been planning this. He used a visual album, something more art piece than commercial product, to satisfy a legal requirement, and then immediately turned around and handed the world the album he actually wanted to make. The label got the obligation, the fans got the masterpiece, and Frank Ocean walked away owning it all. That is probably the cleanest execution of this strategy in music history. Now, Lil Wayne's situation is a little different, but it belongs in this conversation because it shows what happens when the label flips the script. The Carter 5 was supposed to come out in 2014. Wayne had recorded it, it was done, and Cash Money, Birdman's label, refused to release it. Just sat on the album. Wayne wasn't getting advances. He was owed. The label was essentially using the album as a hostage. Wayne went to Twitter, told his fans directly that Birdman and Cash Money were blocking him, filed a $51 million lawsuit. It was messy and public for years. The settlement eventually came, though, reportedly around $10 million. Plus, Wayne got control of his Young Money imprint. The Carter 5 finally dropped in 2018, 4 years later. But here's why it is relevant. In Wayne's case, the label held the album hostage instead of the other way around. They used his own art as leverage. The flip side of this whole conversation. Artists use albums to escape, labels use albums to trap. It's the same weapon, different hands. Wayne eventually got free, but it took years of his career, years of uncertainty, and a very public fight to do it. So now we're back to this week. Drake drops Iceman, Habibti, and Maid of Honor, all in one night. 43 tracks across 3 bodies of work. his 9th, 10th, and 11th studio album. Now, think about the context here. Drake reportedly signed a deal with Republic Records and UMG, reportedly worth around $400 million back in 2022. A deal like that almost certainly comes with a minimum album commitment, multiple records. And he's been in the middle of one of the worst public beefs in rap history, the Kendrick Lamar situation, which has put a cloud over his commercial viability. Not Like Us has been everywhere. His cultural momentum has taken hits. So what does he do? He drops 3 albums at once. Without a full press run, without a tour announcement, without the usual commercial infrastructure around a major label rollout. The hip-hop industry analyst and hedge fund manager Eric Jackson literally called the Iceman release an exit filing. Investors are actually paying attention, wondering if Drake is burning off his contractual obligations in bulk. O'Shea Jackson Jr. put the question into words the whole internet was already thinking. Did he drop 3 albums to get out of his deal? And look at the timing. Drake has been very public about wanting ownership of his masters. He watched Frank Ocean, he watched Prince, he understands what independence means at his level of superstardom. The theory is that if his contract required, let's say, 3 or more albums, he just handed them all in on the same Friday and is now potentially a free agent. The most commercially successful rapper of the streaming era, potentially unattached from a major label. Is that true? If that's true, that's the biggest contract escape in the history of the genre. And unlike Prince's Chaos and Disorder or even Frank Ocean's Endless, Drake didn't hand in trash, he handed in work. The question is whether he handed in work that he wanted to make or work designed to satisfy a legal requirement and nothing more. We probably won't know for a while, but the speculation alone tells you something about where this industry is going. So here's the big picture takeaway from all of this. The record label system was built on one assumption, that artists need labels more than labels need artists. The labels had the money, the distribution, the radio relationships, the marketing infrastructure. Artists had the talent, but they couldn't get it to people without the machine. That's no longer true. Distribution is democratized. Streaming platforms deal directly with artists. Social media is its own promotion engine, and the leverage has absolutely shifted. And these stories, Lou Reed handing in Noise, Neil Young handing in Rockabilly, Prince writing Slave on his face, Frank Ocean playing 4-dimensional chess with a visual album, Drake potentially dropping 3 projects in a single night. All of these stories are artists recognizing that the shift has happened and exploiting it. The Contract Escape album is really about one thing. Artists valuing their future more than their present. The Contract Escape album is really about one thing. Artists valuing their future more than their present. You take a short-term hit, maybe the album doesn't perform, maybe the label is upset, maybe the press is confused, but you buy yourself something more valuable than a chart position. You buy yourself ownership, you buy yourself freedom. And in an era where your catalog is worth more than any single release, where the masters you own compound in value for decades, freedom is the whole game. Drake might have just played it. And if he did, he played it the way Prince would have wanted, not small, all at once, 43 tracks, 3 albums, 1 Friday night, and we'll see where it goes from here.